Grain dust sparkles in a slice of sun as the Zocodover fair wakes under your feet. Roast lamb turns on iron spikes, saffron and garlic drift over stalls, tallow smoke threads the archways, mule bells chatter, brass rings from a bell founder's stand. The Almotessan's scribe raises his board, the parish beadle taps his rod, and you receive a horn lantern, a chalk stub, a pouch of seals, and a narrow ledger. Subscribe and ring the bell to walk Toledo's rules with me, street by street, lantern to ledger. The scribe reads fresh lines in a voice built for stone. The consejo writes ordinances, parish courts fine scandal. The Almotessan weighs truth against weights. Guild wardens guard shop conduct and signs. Hospital clerks track alms borne from fines. Fairs matter for POX control because travelers, money, and touch converge in a tight braid. Visibility becomes treatment. Your job is simple and public. Make rules stand where eyes can find them and let the crowd hear law in clear syllables. You nail the first tablet to a cedar post and chalk a box around it like a frame. A vinatero brings his jug, and your testing ladle dips with ceremony. Watered, honest, you say, and hang a card that repeats the words in letters bigger than a hand. The crowd nods. Letters beat rumor because anyone can point and read early. Trade lifts as if a wind changed, and the seller arranges cups in a straight line that looks like a promise. A dice cup clacks on a stall lip, and the beadle palms it before the second hop. He tips it into an alms jar, tagged from fines to soap. Laughter rolls almost kindly. A ribbon seller offers a silk hood to a woman on a threshold. You raise one finger. She folds the silk into a plain veil in one smooth breath and crosses with dignity intact, fee avoided, lesson understood, without a bruise to pride. At a perfume stall, pomanders shine on the sill like small moons. You lift them inside and tap the lintel. Ingredients, large letters only. He writes rose, clove, apple, vinegar on a card and nails it where the street can read. The scribe scratches a good in his margin. Your lantern throws an agreeable coin of light across glass, so oil glimmers like a soft sun learning its job. A mule train nudges the bell founder's table, and bright metal sings in ripples. You cross to grain scales where dust floats like polite gold and lands on your ledger. Measure posted, weights true, no singing at doors near bells. You recite for 3 sellers and a 4th who needed the music less than the clarity. The square breathes in time with your sentences, as if the ribs of Toledo were a public bellows that works when words are clean. A cloth dealer smooths a bright runner with 2 fingertips, looks at your face, and flips it to its plain side. He ties a red thread to one corner and explains it will be cut at the bell. Clever, you say. and he credits his wife, which feels correct to the crowd. A few stalls copy the trick at once. Small ceremonies sell calm. The beadle hums a line that sounds like agreement, and the scribe writes thread policy in the margin. At the water seller's table, the cups are nicked from honest work. He worries about your stamps until you speak. Dull rims mean safe mouths. You sink the seal, a soft hiss rises, and a woman with a baby smiles at the music of it. You stamp 3 more, hand 1 across, and the buyer shows the crowd how rules pass between hands without losing warmth. A drummer teases a rhythm at a doorway. The beadle points inside with 2 fingers, not a threat, a map. The drummer steps back, and the beat stays domestic. A student arrives with a proud plume. At the jam, you tax the feather, replace it with a plain cord, and his hat sits better. He rolls his eyes for show and thanks you with a grin that admits the bargain made sense. The bell founder shows you a flawed casting, a crescent hairline in bronze. You jot a note. He says bells, like ordinances, improve on the second pour. You believe him. A cousin of the perfumer holds a copper bowl of rose water into a shaft of sun. A glint of oil floats. Ingredients speak on cards, you say, not on surfaces, and he laughs while moving the bowl off the sill. A pilgrim tries a miracle cone at 3 times value. You rub it, smell spice and sawdust, and write spice, not miracle on a scrap. He sells it for half and looks happier. People trust a fair that calls tricks, tricks. A boy asks why fairs hold the burden during POX watch. Because a fair is a city with a handle, you tell him. Fixed stalls, posted boards, inspectors in plain sight. Touch managed where eyes can help. The brewer lifts a cask and lets you draw a measure into the test cup. Watered, honest, you say again, and he hangs the card himself so the claim belongs to his hands. A washerwoman asks where fines walk to after you lift them. Bread, vinegar, soap, lamp oil. You point to the hospital clerk's jar. She nods and explains it to 2 friends. Then the jar looks fluent without speaking. The silk merchant waves a hood like a flag until your eyebrow speaks. She folds it to a plain veil with a motion so neat the beige looks brave. The beadle chalks a listening ear on a post, a friendly one. Wood becomes a witness. The scribe draws a second ear on his board for luck, and a dog sneezes once at the chalk and trots away to better smells. Steel shines up the sword maker's lane. You point at a rag and a pot of oil hanging on a nail. Inside, please, not at the door. He shrugs and shifts the kit. A petty noble tucks lace into his sleeve before buying olives, and you note the fee as saved dignity. Ordinary tastes rescue grand wrists every day. The square remembers how to read its own rules. A tanner invites you to stamp a board that reads skins in soak, stink inside, door clear. You press the wax gently so his pride stays standing. A mule brays at the bell rhythm as if approval had 4 hooves. Your lantern swings on its strap and prints warm circles on your sleeve. The day likes you when your hands do useful theater without noise. A friar wants cleaner lines for songs near bells. Inside, please, you say again, same words, same map. He smiles as if brevity were mercy. The drummer supplies a quiet flourish to celebrate clarity. A girl stretches to touch the chalk ear and then reports that the wall heard her. You write heard in the margin because the joke deserves to live a little longer. The hospital clerk arrives with a ledger that looks heavier than it is. You walk the jar past 3 stalls and read pairs like a litany. Fines to soap, coins to bread, vinegar to wash gear, lamp oil to ward lamps. People repeat the pairs until the words hang in air like lines of laundry. The clerk exhales and looks younger by a year. When cups hiss under your stamp, the crowd hears the sound as public promise. A sign painter lifts a board with lions who want to prance. You raise a palm and he rescues himself, sanding beasts into a cloud and writing wine, measure, declared in steady letters. A child reads the letters twice and declares the declaration. The painter bows to her and pins the board at eye height. Trade quickens because letters grab less attention than pictures while giving more certainty. A drover quarrels with a baker over a price line. You read the assize where weight meets grain cost and let the scales sing level. He grumbles, then nods. You chalk a tidy circle on the jam for re-inspection at midday. Chalk as promise works better than chalk as threat. The drover carries bread away with a look that says he will return hungry, not angry. A woman leans from a doorway with herb cones. You move the tray inside and pin a card that lists rosemary, sage, orange peel. She sighs once, then sells faster because mystery turned into food. A young man hawks a bright cord for caps. You slip a plain ribbon into his palm and the trade becomes a nod instead of a quarrel. The market keeps its temper cheap. A courier from the Alcantara approach elbows carefully through the crowd with a folded stick. He opens it with a click and reads a request from the hospital. Bring a double ledger to the bridge. Fines left, alms right, cups stamped in view, words read aloud so coins turn into care on the same plank as rules. Your lantern brightens the ink. You nod and tuck the thought beside your stamps. You walk the sword maker's lane again with a guild warden who likes rods more than sentences. He taps his boot and you translate taps into words. Hang the sign higher, move the rag farther, angle the stand so a child hand cannot reach the edge. He thanks you with a grunt that counts as grace, and you accept it as if it were music. A pilgrim cart rumbles in with bright cloth darred against the air. You lift a hem, point to the red thread rule, and ask for a public cut at the bell. They grin because ceremony sells. You hand a card that reads, "Lawful color by thread." Everyone practices the phrase until it feels owned by the square rather than borrowed from your mouth. On the bridgeward edge, an eel seller laughs at your joke about slipperiness and hangs a measure card that creaks like a small door. You stamp his shared cup, and he kisses the rim for luck. The scribe groans and then smiles because love, maddening as it is, often helps compliance when it chooses a good target. A mother asks for rules about touch, and you answer plainly. Soap hot, then ointment on skin. Linen changed at posted hours. No shared caps, no shared collars, no shared bed sacks. She repeats the lines to 3 men who needed to hear them, and they repeat them back with the cadence of a recipe. The child on her hip claps during the verbs. The bell founder's apprentice, streaked with soot, raises a tiny clapper and asks if the city rings bigger when the street learns to read. Yes, you say, always. He runs to strike bronze with faith. The tone lands and stays like a neat rule pinned to wood. A mule's ear flicks, then settles. Sound builds its own ledger. 2 sellers argue about a patch of shade. Shade is not law, you tell them. The post is law. You move them 1 plank length and pin a board where both can point. They curse, then calm, because wood that listens beats an oath that wanders. A child peers into your ledger and calls the dots crumbs of law. You agree for the pleasure of his grin. A vintner's lad brings a jug with a rim that glints. You show him bright and dull and ask his eyes to choose. He points at dull. You stamp, and the scribe writes choices that age well, then pretends he did not enjoy his own line. The lad carries his cup like a small oath. A talisman seller sings about miracles for every itch of fortune. You ask for ingredients, and he lists wood, string, patience, courage. He sells one for less after that, and the beetle laughs into his sleeve. The square keeps its balance because jokes bend without breaking the rules that matter. At the bread stall, you weigh loaves again and let the assize speak for temper. A boy asks if soap really grows from coins. Yes, you tell him, if the city plants them at the hospital and not under a pillow. He nods like a veteran of failed pillows. The perfumer replaces his card with bolder letters. A comb semmer sands a carved leaf smooth where a mouth might touch and calls it kindness with teeth. Under broadcloths, the silk seller's rig works. Bright edges fold inward, plain faces show outward, red thread waits for the bell. She credits the onion seller, who snorts and blushes at once. A muleteer tries to hang a song sheet, and you tell him songs have doors like people. He moves the sheet inside, and the tune cools to a pleasant temperature. A monk in a brown habit likes that fines walk straight to soap. Boards do work that sermons cannot always do at speed, he says, and you feel seen. He asks whether the chalk ear offends, and the crowd votes with smiles, so the ear stays. He buys vinegar for the infirmary and leaves the change in the jar without theatrics. Back at the founder's bench, a ribbon of metal pours from a ladle into a waiting mold. The stream obeys the channel, the way a good street obeys posted letters. He calls that the only alchemy he trusts. You watch the bell harden and think of rules cooling into habit until they ring on their own without your finger on the clapper. A boy stumbles on your lantern strap and steadies himself with a small salute. You sling the strap over your shoulder like a sash, and the scribe doodles a tiny flag by your name. The beadle pretends boredom and hides a smile. The jar waits like a patient animal. Now pause with me at the cedar post and choose a tool. Which visible rule would steady your city fastest? Posted ingredients, stamped water jugs, token slates, red threads at latches. Drop your vote in the comments and include your city name, so tomorrow we can carry the right props. The fair believes advice works best when it arrives in wood and letters. A painter arrives with saints and swords on a tavern sign. You offer a blank plank and ink. He sighs, then writes, wine, measure, declared, ordinary price today. The letters gather trust without gold. The saints and swords return to their cloth until festival time. The tavern keeper thanks you with chickpeas and a wink that reads like a receipt. You return to your cedar frame and refresh the chalk, not because it faded, because rehearsal makes memory easy. A new vendor shows cups with rims like mirrors. You teach dull protects, bright invites trouble. He stamps beside you and hears the hiss that audiences love. Shared smiles run ahead of your feet like a herald nobody can afford to hire. A weaver's daughter asks if plain can be beautiful. You say yes, when plain keeps tempers cheap. She flips a cloth without spilling stew, and her brother bows with both hands open like a hero of lunch. Onion broth sells faster because courage tastes good. Mule bells jingle. The founder taps a clean note, and the scribe approaches with his board under his arm like a sleeping cat. At the lower edge, he has pressed 2 spare seals. Surprise rounds, he says, blade maker's lane, then the alcantara approach. Carry the wax, make it sing. You pocket the seals and feel the square lean toward your next steps. Near the spice arcade, A brazier glows too close to a reed mat. You set your lantern on a crate, grip the brazier legs with a cloth, and shift the coals 2 arm lengths. The keeper winces, then nods when the mat stops warming. Safe distance is a phrase with weight. You chalk a neat mark on the floorboard, and the room exhales. Heat belongs in bowls, not doorways, you say, and 3 neighbors move their own embers without waiting to be told. You spend a stretch checking measure cards like little oaths: eel, wine, almonds, vinegar, posted and legible. Where a letter smears, you replace the card and hand the seller a rag. You dot a small circle on a jam to mark a return, then a second at a stall that needs more light. The beadle plans a horn round at midday, so everyone hears inspection as a sound before it arrives as a seal. A baker wheels out a tray of buns tinted bright with saffron and grins at the crowd. You look at the color and at the scribe. Festival color, not for ordinary trade today. He blinks, then agrees to sell the tray for alms. Coin walks left on your plank, loaves walk right for the wards, and his tray returns to the oven for a plainer batch. He calls that a lesson with sugar. The square approves with quiet appetite. A wine lad runs up with a shared cup that has lost its stamp to honest use. You reseal the rim, and the hiss draws a small cheer, proof that sound can teach as well as ink. The lad hangs his measure card higher and belts the board to the post with a scrap of leather so it will not wander. You write "good belt" in the margin to save yourself a sentence later. A messenger at the edge of the fair unfolds a stick and reads the hospital's request. Bring the double ledger to the bridge. Set fines left and alms right. Stamp cups in view and read the pairs aloud, so coin becomes care where everyone can see. You lift your lantern, oil glimmering like permission, close the ledger with a small thump, and turn toward the blade maker's lane with the seals tucked safe. Steel sings along the sword maker's lane as you shoulder the lantern and feel the spare seals thump softly against your hip. Heat breathes from forges, a drift of coal and oil, and filings sparkle like tiny fish where hammers wake them. You step into the first doorway, chalk ready, voice ready, and if you want this walk every day with the street as your guide, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a turn from lantern to ledger. Measures and manners, the Almatassin scribe reminds, keeping pace at your elbow. Quality, hours, signs, a guild warden adds without looking up from a rod that taps rhythm on the stones. The beadle gestures to the mouth of the lane. Parish fines for what the books do not name, he says. Doorway soliciting, bawdy songs near bells, the little frictions that raise tempers and carry touch further than sense. You nod and raise the lantern so its horn panes throw a warm square across the threshold of a Inside, sword blanks lean like reeds beside a bucket of oil. A boy reaches for a rag that has dried to a stiff curl on a peg outside the door. Inside, you tell him, oil and rags inside. The master lifts his eyebrow. For the book? You smile. For the street. He shrugs, posts a placard that reads oil and rags inside, and 3 neighbors read it without being asked. Praise rises in the quiet form of space cleared and splinters swept. A petty noble drifts up with 2 porters. Lace glows at his cuff like a small sunrise. He sees your eyes, tucks the lace into his sleeve, and takes a clay cup of ordinary wine. You note the fee in your ledger, face saved, lesson learned, conversation spared. He lifts the cup to the porters, and they lift their bread to him. Rank takes a seat when letters stand tall. A clatter to your left. A student's hat tilts at an angle invented by vanity. A proud feather lifts like a sail. At the threshold, you weigh it with your glance, point to the placard that lists small taxes, and he gives you a grin shaped like surrender. The feather becomes a plain ribbon. The hat fits better. The boy laughs at himself before anyone else can. The stall laughs with him. Temper stays cheap. Across the lane, a sign painter holds up a board with lions that look ready to roar. You set your lantern on his stool and pass him a brush with plain ink. Letters, you say. Vino, Medita, Declarado. He breathes out, sands the beasts to a ghost, writes the words steady and square, and hands the board to the wine cellar. Pictures were clever, letters sell calm. Within an hour, the board has more fingerprints than any lion would have earned. From a doorway, a perfumer fans air with a palm like a priest. The sill is dressed with combs and little glazed jars. You escort him 2 steps backward, inside the line of the door, and hand him a slate. Ingredients, you say, big as pride, small as wise. He writes rose, clove, vinegar, apple, lavender, and pins the slate at eye height. The scribe nods and notes that a shop which reads itself aloud invites fewer arguments. The warden tests your measure at a wine shop. You dip the city scoop into a shared cup, taste like a judge who cares more for honesty than sugar, and hang a card that says, watered, honest. Trade bumps upward as if the stall got larger. The seller bows to the sign, not to you, and that is exactly how the square likes it. Trust prefers wood to faces. You move again. The Almotexan stops at scales where sword handles weigh as much as talk. He adjusts a counterweight, then taps the beam, satisfied when it floats. Guild rules guard quality, hours, and signage, he murmurs. I keep the measure honest. You and the beetle price the heat of a song, the shape of a glance, the mess at a door. He smiles once. Each of us takes a piece that the others cannot hold. A lute plucks from a lintel with the volume of a dare. You step into the frame and raise one finger toward the interior. The player nods as if you taught a chord, steps back, and the tune calms to domestic speed. The warden pretends not to smile. A woman with baskets shifts her path to pass easily, and she says, not expecting an answer, that rules which move music a few feet can move tempers many feet. The blade master you corrected before now gestures at the rag he hung inside. Better? He asks. Better, you say, and stamp a dull, glazed water jug at his bench so his apprentices can drink from a rim that protects mouths. The hiss of the seal draws 3 neighbors who ask for the same. You leave the shop with 5 safe cups and a small chorus of thanks that sounds like metal cooling. At the corner where drapers hang cloth like banners of weather, you raise your lantern to inspect trim. Veils must keep to lawful widths. Sleeve edges cannot parade as court when a lane needs to work like a lane. You carry a strip of string and a small board marked with notches. You measure quickly, never theatrically. A weaver's daughter meets your eye, flips a bright sash to a plain ribbon, and smiles because she chose the change herself. Why the fuss over fabric? A cloth seller asks with the tone of a man who knows and wants to hear it again. Because eyes are faster than ears, you answer. Spectacle invites crowds. Crowds bend rules, and bending spreads touch. Plain trims keep streets moving and hands behaving. He nods as if you reminded him of a proverb that had lived under dust. A lute plucks again from somewhere you cannot see. The sound moves backward 3 steps, as if a rule tugged it by the sleeve. The beetle gives you a look that translates as good. You pin a small tablet at shoulder height beside the nearest door. No doorway soliciting, witness inside. It reads like a whisper that the whole lane hears. At a stall where combs and knives share a table, you see a dish of oil and a rag sitting on the sill. You tap the wood. Inside. The seller pulls them in, wipes the sill with a dry cloth, and moves the combs a finger's breadth back. He pins a card, oil and rags inside, with a gesture like a bow. A child touches the letters and whispers them. The street becomes a school without desks. You pause to speak to the lens of whoever walks this with you. What visible rule would cool your city fastest? Posted ingredients, stamped water jugs, token slates, red threads on latches. Drop your vote in the comments and write your city name. Tomorrow we carry your choice to the next doorway we police together. Along the lane of blade makers, the noise rolls like surf. You find a table with copper bowls and a bright jug with a suspiciously shiny lip. You lift it, tilt it to the light, and show the seller the difference between mirror and matte. Dull for mouths, you say. He nods and holds out the jug. The stamp hisses. 3 customers ask to see the seal. Everyone loves a sound that means, yes, this part of the world is under care. A petty noble returns with his porters for olives and cheese. His lace is already tucked. You write a tiny mark, a note that a habit caught on the first correction tends to hold. He thanks you without saying why. That economy of words people adopt once the street stops feeling like an exam. A porter tells a joke about lions who learned to spell, and the noble laughs like a man who likes to pass. At a corner where swords and ribbons collide, you meet a perfumer who has moved his cones inside but still keeps a scented bowl on a bench near the door. You lift the bowl, sniff the sweet sting of clove, and hand it to him. Let the ingredients speak, not the air. He shrugs, sets the bowl deeper, and pins a larger card over the bench. Rose, clove, vinegar, apple, camphor. He repeats the list like a grocery, not a miracle. A woman buys the vinegar and says she trusts a shop that writes down what it is. A dice clatter rattles from a blade shop threshold, as if daring you to choose between steel and rules. You step in, lift the cup with 2 fingers, and tip it into the same jar you carry for soap. From fines to soap, reads the label, and someone in back repeats it like a charm. The master pretends the dice migrated there on their own. The boy who threw them looks at his shoes and then at your lantern. You nod once. He nods back. That is usually enough. At the draper's bend, a squad of apprentices practices the fold and flip of runners, the way some practice steps at a dance. Bright out for legal hours, plain out for ordinary trade. You mark a red thread at 2 corners, a small thread to cut at the bell, so that spectacle knows its moment and does not wander. The beadle approves with a tap of the rod that reads as applause to those who understand his grammar. The almotasen calls you to scales, where a bundle of cloth argues with a bundle of words about grain price and weight. You hold the assize card in the lantern light, read the line where weight meets coin, and let the beam settle. The seller shakes his head at mathematics and then swallows the pill. The buyer smiles because the line was not a rumor. Behind you, the scribe copies the result, tying your chalk to his ink until both feel like one rule. A student returns, this time with a friend whose plume slants like a question mark. You tap the sign, point to the basket of plain cords, and give him a look that says, "Choose quickly." He laughs, pays a small coin, changes the ribbon himself, and the pair bow as if you were an usher at a play they want to see again. You wish every correction could be bought with a smirk and a cord. A sword maker's wife watches you stamp another jug and asks if the sound ever grows old. No, you tell her, because it is music the crowd can claim. She smiles and holds up a cup for her apprentices. Then give them a song they can repeat. The hiss lifts, and 3 boys grin like people who just learned a useful word. You pass a money changer who cleans his weights with vinegar and shows you his towel as if it were a saint's bone. You nod and keep walking. Clean tools do not brag, they protect. Someone repeats the line, and it becomes the day's motto in the space of a breath. It will appear on a board before sunset, because that is what good lines do. At a draper's porch, a woman tests veils by pulling the cloth tight and seeing how it falls. You take your string, measure the width, and make a tiny notch on your board to show compliance. Plain keeps tempers cheap, she says. Plain keeps tempers cheap, you echo, and the 2 of you share a grin that admits how lovely a rule can feel when it behaves like a friend. Close by, a brazier sits too near a reed mat. You gesture, the owner shifts it a palm's breadth, and the nearest 3 stalls imitate the move almost immediately. Fire risk and crowd risk are cousins. They travel together and they calm together when the room learns the pleasure of a safe inch. You chalk a mark on the floor like a footprint that says, "Stand here if you wish not to be blamed later." A signboard with lions returns from sanding. The letters now read Vino, Medita, Declarado, and they shine by not shining. You watch a customer touch the words and then the edge of the board, as if thanking the wood. Sales jump in a way you can see even without the purse opening. Pictures tempt, letters settle. The street needs the second as much as it enjoys the first. A boy runs up from the bridge, breath bright. "Singers," he says, 2 by the fish stalls, loud as brass. The beadle sets his jaw. "Near bells?" "Near enough," the boy says. You study the lane ahead. Your path runs past a last knot of blade stalls and then bends toward the bridge where eel sellers hang measures beside nets. You signal to move, but first the warden stops you with a hand on your sleeve. "Say it again," he says, "for the apprentices." You turn and speak to the cluster who pretend they are not listening. Guilds defend quality, hours, and signs. The almotassin enforces measures. Parishes fine scandal the books do not name, like doorway soliciting or bawdy songs near bells. Together, that makes a street you can walk without a fight. Heads bob. Even the stubborn boy from earlier nods. The warden releases your sleeve with a grunt that holds approval. On your way, you pause at a wine shop where the measure card has slid lower. You lift it to eye height and belt it with leather so it cannot wander with the wind. The owner thanks you with a gloved hand. You test the jug again, watered, honest. People cheer and echo when it confirms a favorite truth. The seller sends a cup to a porter who carried stone all morning. The porter drinks like a man who knows exactly how public order tastes on the tongue. A weaver waves you over to show a thread he tied like a tiny bow on a runner's corner. "Cut at the bell," he says, "or we owe a coin." You agree, make a small mark on your board to remember this lane's good habit, and say loudly enough for 3 stalls, "That clever ceremony keeps inspectors happy and trade smooth." Laughter ripples in the pattern of relief. The perfumer tries again with a bowl on a bench. You tilt your head, he tilts his bowl, and the thing returns inside without a word. He replaces it with a slate that lists clove, nutmeg, rose, vinegar. A woman points and repeats the words to a friend. The friend buys the vinegar for washing combs. Touch retreats when ingredients step onto boards where eyes can check them without asking permission. At the sword polisher's stand, you see a jar of water with a gleam of iron on top. You ask for a fresh jug and stamp the rim. The hiss is fainter, but still true. He smiles like a person who owns a new verb. The beetle breathes a quick line that sounds like gratitude, and the scribe writes a note to remind himself to ask for oil at that stand next week rather than at the door. Past the drapers, a small fight wants to be born between a porter and a ribbon seller. You place your lantern between their faces so they must look at their own reflections. "Lions are letters today," you say. "Bright waits for bells, plain walks free." The porter grunts, buys plain, and the ribbon seller bows as if she had planned this outcome. The moment dies without ever having lived. The crowd loves when fury fails to launch. A boy tugs your sleeve hard enough to borrow your balance. "My mother says you forgot her jug," he announces with pride. You follow him 2 stalls down, stamp the rim, and listen to the hiss that makes his eyes widen. "It sings," he says. "It does," you answer. He carries the cup like a prize, and you write the word "prize" beside his mother's name, because memory likes to wear a ribbon too. You lean into a doorframe where music spills like broth. "Inside," you say with a palm that guides rather than orders. The singer nods and steps back. The tone drops to a table voice, and the fish seller 3 doors down looks grateful to you for a favor you did not directly do. Rules travel like that, in second hands and sideways glances, effective even when the author walks on. A cart with linen creaks by. You read the card that lists exchange hours, then add a chalk ear to the cart's plank so the rule can listen to its own promise. The driver chuckles and salutes with 2 fingers. You press the thought to your ledger. When people salute rules, rules work harder for people. The scribe adds a smiley line. You pretend not to notice. At a little shop where knives meet embroidery, you check that sharp things stay inward and soft things face the street. The seller raises an eyebrow and then mirrors your gestures. "This is not just about POX," he says. "No," you answer. "It is about heat and hurry, fights and greed, and how to keep a fair from turning into a riot." He nods like someone who has seen both moods in one afternoon. A sudden laugh pulls your attention. The student with the improved hat draws a few coins from a game on 3 cups, the one you warned against earlier. His eye meets yours. He shrugs, pockets the coin, and hands the cups to you without being asked. You tip them into the jar. "From fines to soap," the label says again. He salutes like a performer finishing an act and goes to carry a keg instead. Good choices multiply when the crowd notices who gets to stay. At the far bend of the lane, a smith's child traces your chalk ear on a post and announces to her father that the wood understands. The father thanks you for teaching the post a language. The father gets a stamp on his jug. The child listens to the hiss as if it were a fairy's breath. You give her a scrap of string and tell her it measures peace. She runs off to measure 4 smiles and returns with triumph. You angle toward the mouth that opens to the bridge. Humidity climbs in the air as if the river were practicing an argument. Fish scales glitter along boards like scattered coins. Hawkers call eel, 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 and children try to echo them with the dignity of professionals. A wave of song swells from near the fish stalls. You recognize the tune that loves to flirt with bells. Before you reach the singers, a beadle steps from behind a post with the calm of a man who remembers every rule by its smell. "Crowd growing at the bridge," he reports. 2 singers, 3 sellers who enjoy echo, and a dozen who think they are invisible when they are loud. The inspectors want you to carry the wax to the hospital gate for a public swap, fines to alms. We make the trade visible. We cool the street. He peers at your pouch. "Got seals left?" "Enough," you say, and you lift the lantern so its horn panes pour gold across fish and faces. The bridge waits with songs that want rules. You tighten the strap on it and walk towards sound, needing a frame. Tar breathes from the bridge timbers as you angle off the span and into the mule yards, where corrals thump like slow drums and leather creaks in a dozen dialects. Hay dust floats in sheets. A sour sweetness rises from dung and old straw. Buckles clack. A handler whistles with 2 fingers. You lift the horn lantern so its pane throws a steady square on a gatepost, and the beetle nudges your elbow. Good timing. Subscribe and ring the bell to walk these yards with me each day, cart tongue to ledger line, seal to seal, and we will see how Toledo keeps a fair healthy when crowds press shoulder to shoulder. A stable boy watches your chalk with a kind of awe as you draw a listening ear on the post. "Wood learns faster than some men," you tell him, and he believes you because the ear looks like it is already paying attention. The almotassins scribe flips his board and reads the yard price lines while a guild warden touches 3 halters and a scale like a conductor checking his section. Parish fines set the cost of scandal. Guild rules set the cost of honesty. Both claim visibility as the cure. Vice and illness love a blind corner, so you erase corners with boards and voices and a square of light. Parish fines set the cost of scandal. Guild rules set the cost of honesty. Both claim visibility as the cure. Vice and illness love a blind corner, so you erase corners with boards and voices and a square of light. A muleteer lopes toward the gate with a grin that says luck lives in his pocket. You see the little dice board before he does. 2 taps with your tally rod, and the grin becomes a sheepish cough. Into the alms jar, please. From fines to soap, the label explains, the same phrase you taught 100 doorways ago. He shrugs, drops the board into the glass mouth, and watches a stable hand clap once as if a small storm had passed. The beadle chalks a tiny circle on the gate beam, reinspection later, and the circle looks like a coin promising change. You post a tablet that lists linen exchange hours in letters thick as rope. A woman with a baby tilts her head and reads the words aloud twice, so the sound fixes. You rope off a clean corner and tag bales of bedding with a stamped strip. Permitted, the strip says. 2 boys bounce on their toes and ask if they can stamp. You give one the wax and the other the seal and teach the motion. They press, the strips hiss, and the boys grin as if the sound were a tame bird landing on their wrists. At the gear shed, a stew pot sweats beside a row of bridles, so close that grease picks up dust and dust picks up grease. You slide the pot along the bench with the back of your hand and set it on a crate 2 strides from leather. Kitchen here, tack there. The cook scowls for show, then looks at the clean space and decides it is his idea. He pins a card that reads, "No grease by gear," and the nearest teamster salutes with a spoon. Music swells near the gate, too close to bells you will pass soon. You step into the doorway, palm inward. "Inside for songs," you say. The players step back as if you taught them a better key. The tune softens and stays, and 3 mules relax their ears at once, like flags remembering polite weather. A seller of oranges offers you a perfumed fruit as a charm against whatever the world plans. You smell clove and rind and right spice, not miracle, on his scrap, then post ingredients on his slate. He sells 2 with an honest smile that reads like a receipt. At the washing trough, you set your small sand timer on a board and flip it, the grain pouring by a rule older than paper. Scrub until the fall ends. Rinse, ointment after. Wait for the second fall before cloth goes back on. You repeat the sequence with 5 men and a woman who tends the mules that tend the money. They speak the steps together by the 3rd round, a chorus of verbs that turns strangers into a work party. The scribe copies the timer note into his book as if sand were an instrument the city keeps in tune. You show a sailor how to tell burrows from bites with a charcoal mark on his wrist. Bites look like coins, you say. Burrows travel like thin roads. Hot soap first, then ointment, then linen. He nods, says thank you with a hand on his heart, and marches to the line that snakes toward the vat. Children watch with open mouths, then chant linen in, linen out, like they invented the rhyme. Their mothers hear the chant, and suddenly the work feels like something the city can keep neat. A mule snorts at your lantern's glow, then sighs when the flame steadies. You stamp dull, glazed water jugs for the handlers, so mouths drink from lips that protect, not shine. The hiss works on the yards the way it worked on the stalls. A handler kisses the stamp as if the city itself had lowered its forehead to bless him. He hangs a tag on the cup that reads, "Share with care," and the joke lands hard enough to stick. The beadle walks the fence line and counts oaths. He listens for wagers hidden in talk. He pinches 2 fingers together, his signal for noise migrating toward trouble. You step into the frame again, where 3 players are ready to try a song that belongs in a tavern, not in a corral. Inside, you say, friend voice engaged. They obey. A mule tears hay with the calm of a king, and the crisis melts into chewing. At the straw pile, you scratch a dot on your board for every bale headed to boil. A woman from the hospital points to the old pit where fleas have enjoyed 20 winters. We dug it deeper last year, she says. Vinegar and lye, then sun. You nod and nail a card that reads straw out, straw in beside hers. Children run the words with their fingers as if reading were a kind of churn. A boy holds up a beetle with the pride of a fisherman, and you say kindly that today is not the day for collections, then thank him for guarding the letters. A muleteer argues for bright trim on his cap because he thinks work should sparkle. You hand him a plain cord and a choice. Parade at bells, plain for trade. He tries true, irritated silence, fails and laughs. The plain cord ties his story together better than the feather did. He repeats your line in a new accent, and suddenly the yard speaks 2 languages of compliance, yours and his, both valid. A handler brings a travel roll tied with hope. You unroll it on a clean board. Shirt, hose, cap, a silvered comb that snags light like a trap. You read the posted hours for linen exchange and tag his bag with a narrow strip that says, "Return by second bell." He thanks you as if you had cured something, but you know the cure is the schedule, not your face. The ear on the post watches the swap, chalk warm in sun. Over the rail, a stew pot bubbles with a persuasive scent. You step back to see the line of air it sends toward the bridles you moved earlier. The line now breaks and wanders toward a wall that can take the grease. You nod at physics as if it were a priest with a good sermon. The cook catches the nod and looks pleased, a man who has learned a new way to place warmth. The almotasen points to a scale where packs are weighed before the caravans push east. He shows a driver how to set the counterweights until the lever floats true. Measures prevent fights, you say. Prices prevent sulk. He agrees and taps the beam as if he were closing an argument that had almost grown a fist. The scribe writes a neat line about honesty that sounds like a proverb and pretends he heard it from someone else. A mule bolts its ears backward. You follow the line of the animal's stare and find a gambler near the gate, palming a tiny die as if it were a secret coin. You hold out your jar, and he freezes like theater caught by daylight. The beetle arrives with a speed that belongs to fathers and storms. The board drops into glass, and the sound is so familiar, the yard laughs instead of snarls. From fines to soap, the label repeats, and a child says it before the letters can. You flip the timer again for the ointment round. The smell of brimstone and fat moves through the yard like a work song. The apothecary had warned you that people dislike the odor right before they learn to love results. You speak the steps again. Hot soap, rinse, rub, wait, linen. A woman with strong hands marks each back like a baker marks loaves, 2 neat rows across the cohort. Someone asks where the money goes when you take a board. To vinegar, to straw, to soap, to lamp oil, you say, and point at the jar so the answer is not a lecture, but a finger. A boy with a perfumed orange tries to sell it as a saint against itch. You lift it, slice the peel with a knife, and show the clove studs that make the air fast. Spice, not miracle, you say, and he shrugs, relabels, sells 2, and whistles a tune too small to disturb a mule. He thanks you for teaching his hands a straighter way to move coin, and you thank him for the smell that made the lecture easy. A muleteer brags about sharing belts because friendship means generosity. You turn, friendly but firm. No shared belts, no shared caps, no shared sacks. He sulks for 3 breaths, then laughs and calls himself a fool with charm in it. He writes the line on his roll with charcoal so he can act smart later. The warden pats your shoulder with 2 fingers that mean good work, and please keep it simple. At the back corral, a steward keeps a ledger of bunk use, like a baker counts loaves. You set your lantern on his plank and post a small slate that reads, "Clean bunks by chalk line." He draws a neat box at the corner of each bed to mark when it is safe. The boxes become a fleet of little harbors, and the yard's chaos reads like a map. A handler touches chalk to his forehead and says, "Thank you, city." The mule yard smells change during the hour, from sharp dung to soap and vinegar and damp wool. Your boots crunch grit, heel toe, in a rhythm that the beetle matches with his rod on the post. People notice the beat and keep time to it without thinking. You start to believe the square choreographs itself if the music is measured and the steps are clear. A monk arrives with a note from the parish court, polite as fresh water. He quotes a line, "Parish prices scandal. Guilds price honesty. Both claim visibility as the remedy. We prefer to hear it sung by cups and boards. You hold up your seal like a small instrument." He bows, amused, and sends you to bless 3 more jugs. Bless is an easy word when the hiss earns it. You tag a series of clean bed sacks and arrange them like folded vowels. A woman from the hospital passes with straw bales that smell like winter working. Children read linen in, linen out as a game of tag, and then keep reading after the game ends. The yard becomes a classroom that nobody ordered. You cut 2 red threads from runners at the cook tent when the bell from a chapel ruffles the air. The clean side stays. The color waits for legal hour. A muleteer tries to hand you a coin to excuse a song at the gate. The beetle clears his throat with a sound that means never. You take the coin and place it in the jar instead. Then you invite him to sing in the shelter, where walls catch noise and return it as comfort. He considers, smiles, and shifts his feet toward the doorway. Crowd healed. Temptation paid for light and straw instead of anger. Another roll opens under your hands. You find a cap with a scented sachet sewn into the band. You lift it, hand it back, and trade it for a sprig of rosemary and a slip that reads, "Rinse gear in vinegar." He looks at the rosemary with suspicion, then at your face, and decides he likes the smell better than the sachet. He ties the sprig to his strap like a ribbon and calls it his new captain. At the gate, a steward gives the caravan oath in a voice that reminds you of oars. Way, right, water, walk. No false measures, no bribed hands, no body ballads, mere bells. You collect the last words and set them in a frame near the door. Keep songs inside. The chorus nods and hums a work tune that swings like a net, slow, sure, and warm. A mule flicks its tail in time. You pause at the lens and ask the viewers following your lantern which visible tool their city would use today. Posted ingredients, stamped jugs, token slates, red threads on latches. Drop your pick and your city in the comments. We carry your advice to the next gate because streets teach each other faster than textbooks ever will. Past the corrals, A man tries to sell a charm made of coins, drilled and strung. You weigh it in your palm, hear the jingle, and say, "Theater." He shrugs and prices it as decoration. The beadle pretends he invented the reform. The crowd laughs in a small circle that leaves nobody cold. Money keeps its manners when it knows eyes are near. You find a cook who keeps his pot away from gear because you moved it. He has written the rule onto a plank in slanted letters. No grease by bridles. He adds a smile to the end because he has watched you draw ears and envies your chalk. You approve his plank with a neat stamp on the upper corner, not because planks need stamps, but because he will sleep happy and model the posture you want to see elsewhere. At a stable door, a pair of singers warm their throats like smiths warming iron. You point at the threshold, and they step backward, voice mellowing as if replaced by wine with water. A mule nods as if to say thank you. The singers laugh and make their tune thinner, no less sweet. You have learned that good songs change rooms by degrees, not by volume. Farther in, a young woman shows you a tear in a sack. She asks how to mend it so straw does not sneak through and scratch skin. You suggest a double stitch with waxed thread and hold her hand steady for the first 2 loops. She finishes the seam with pride that tastes like clean work. You stamp her water jug, and her grin makes 3 men grin for reasons they cannot name. A caravan boss wants to argue about the time it takes to wait for ointment. You point to the sand timer and say the fall is the same for everyone. He glares, then laughs because your answer had no edges to cut. He posts a note above his bench, "Wait by sand, not by mood," and starts telling the story of the time sand disobeyed him, which everyone enjoys because it did not. A quarrel blooms near the straw heap, all elbows and throat. 2 caravans claim the same pile. You hold up the strip that reads "First boil, then bed," and the heat drops. You peel 2 bales, tag 1 for vat and 1 for sun, then trade the men a task. You lift, you count. A woman from the draper's quarter arrives with plain cloth cut to sack size. You pay from the jar, mark the ledger, alms to linen, then point her to the line so hands move in order. At a side gate, a hawker shouts a verse about oranges fit for a tavern. You walk him back to the stall mouth and tap the board that reads "Witness" inside. He swaps his rhyme for price and peel and sells without a fine. An older man rubs a strap until it warms. Vinegar, you say, then oil, then dry cloth and distance from the cook fire. He follows and smiles, knee easier now. The Almatassin's warden beckons to a table where bridle bits rest like coins. He weighs 1, nods, and marks a star because the bit meets both weight and cleanliness. The scribe hangs a token slate above the wash corner. Tokens on beams, not sleeves. People sign beside their tokens instead of wearing them, and a cloud of touching vanishes. A child copies names, and you realize a rule just became habit. A priest's helper arrives with a small basket of bread and vinegar. He sets it by the jar, bows, and says the hospital is ready. Bells carry through the yards like a clean wind. The double ledger plank waits by the bridge, he says, and they want you to read pairs aloud while cups hiss under your stamp so the crowd hears coin turn into care. You lift your lantern. Oil brightens. Seals sit heavy as purpose in your pouch. You point toward the gate and the yard moves with you as if the chalk ears had grown feet. You reach the bridge approach, where stone brushes your boots and the river hums against its arches. Stall ropes ping in the breeze. The hospital sister has set 2 trestles and a plank by the Alcantara gate, a clean stage for a swap the whole city can watch. The Almatacen scribe taps his quill on the left column, finds, then points at the right, lamp oil, vinegar, straw, bread. Your horn lantern throws a square of warm light over the wood. If walking street rules in real time is your kind of history, subscribe and ring the bell so we meet here every day, seal by seal. The beadle places the jar at your elbow. You warm a flick of wax on the lantern glass and press your stamp into it. The plank looks ordinary, but everyone knows it is a hinge where orders move and care follows. A drumbeat far down the lane fades. The fare makes room for the board as if it were an altar made from errands. The scribe raises his voice. "Dirty kit, 3 maravedis," he reads. "Lye and vinegar, 3 maravedis." You repeat each line left to right, so the crowd hears coin turn into care on the same wood. You stamp a pewter wash cup, permitted, and the rim answers with a small hiss. Heads tilt. The hiss has traveled the yards, and now it learns the bridge. A woman with a basket laughs under her breath and says the sound saves arguments. She is right. The hiss makes less talking do more work. A porter points at a second cup. You stamp again, permitted, and the hiss lands like a promise clipped short, easy to keep. A dice cup appears at the table edge. You lift it and tip it into the alms jar, marked from fines to soap. The clink turns the joke into a lesson without a scold. The scribe writes it down as if the book were a street with lines that breathe. A scarlet canopy snaps above a wine plank, bright enough to draw a crowd. The watch steward glances at you. You tip your chin. The owner unlashes the scarlet and swaps it for canvas. Applause happens without hands. It sounds like feet agreeing. The scribe writes canopy to canvas under fines, then lamp oil under alms. A child asks why scarlet pays for light. Because color pulls a crush, and lamps calm a crush, you say. She nods and tells the rule back to you with new words. The rule has crossed a small bridge of its own. A minstrel in a bright sash steps close, pride and worry warring in his stance. He knows a fine is coming. He pulls the sash free, cuts it into chords, and tightens his drum. He plays a 4-beat pattern that sounds like work making ready. Service cancels the fee. The beadle rules. The scribe writes ribbon to chords on the left, then bread and vinegar on the right. The crowd absorbs the logic and takes a half step inward. You stamp 2 more cups, permitted. The hiss stitches the space between rules and goodwill. A sign painter arrives with a plank crowded by lions that chase grapes. Pretty, you say, and he lowers his head because he knows what is next. He sands the beasts to letters while the lane watches. Vino, medida, declarado. The words look like a good door. You stamp the seller's jug, permitted, and trade rides the hiss. A muleteer drops a coil of thread on the plank. It shines more than straw deserves. Parade cord, he admits. You swap it for plain line and tie the knot yourself. The scribe posts the fee on the left and straw for cots on the right. The muleteer hugs one bale and says his brother will sleep without scratching. The river carries the sentence downstream as if it were a song. A baker leans in with a tray of buns that glow like little suns. Saffron, he whispers. The sister has warned you that saffron is both food and costume in this city. During a POX watch, spectacle acts like heat on dry brush. You touch a bun with the back of your finger. Luxury in a season of caution, you say. Coin left, loaves and lamp oil right. He swallows, then nods. The line approves the swap more than the censure. He sets the tray down and signs the line with a steady hand. You hold up the jar so the coins catch light. Saffron buns, 8. Lamp oil, 8. Vinegar, 8. Bread, 8. The sister shows the wicks that will burn cleaner for a week. The baker looks at his board and says he will shape plain rounds until bells allow color again. People clap quietly. The sound travels under the arch like steady rain that feeds fields without flooding them. The sign painter, emboldened by letters, offers to rewrite a price plank for a wine seller who still clings to a crowned bird. He paints a strong word. Wine, then measure, then declared. The lane reads together, and the wine seller watches his trade lift on honesty. You stamp his dull glazed jug, permitted. The hiss is a tiny theater everyone attends without tickets. The scribe taps the left column. Doorway soliciting, fine. Loud song near bells, fine. Bright runners inside, fine. You read each pair with its match on the right. Lamp oil, lie, straw, bread. The board becomes a mirror, and the lane likes the version of itself that looks back. A woman steps up with a bundle of ribbons taken from 3 thresholds. She asks if service can cancel the debt. What service, you ask? She points at the canopies. Canvas needs ties. You smile and help her cut the ribbons into cords. The sister writes ribbons to ties under fines and lamp oil to ward under alms. The woman presses her fingers to the wood as if sealing a pact. A perfumer sets down cones that smell like theater, ready to argue, then feels the crowd's mood shifting the air. He calls them spice, posts ingredients, and lowers the price. The scribe writes false cure to vinegar and bread. The table draws breath, if a table can do such a thing. Not softer, clearer. A wine boy slips a cup along the edge without a stamp. A porter clears his throat, not in anger, in lesson. You lift the cup, check the lip, stamp it, and the hiss returns to its simple work. The boy blushes. The porter pats his shoulder. The plank keeps teaching without a wagging finger. Care is the bribe, and it is honest. A clerk floats forward with a hat banded by a bright ribbon. He tucks the ribbon under the band as he reaches the plank. Fee saved, face saved. You record the gesture and read the measure he came to check. He leaves with pride, trimmed by a practical hand. The sister uses 2 coins to buy vinegar for the washroom and points at the right column like a baker pleased with a well-risen loaf. A boy leans near and whispers that the hiss sounds like the city's own sigh. You stamp 3 cups so the sigh can braid itself into a stronger chord. The painter asks why letters beat lions. Because letters walk into mouths, you say. Lions only stare. The lane laughs and claims the line as theirs. 2 drapers' wardens arrive with a reversible runner. Plain on one face, bright on the other, pinned by a thread that carries the city seal. They ask if you will cut the thread at bells so everyone can watch the law turn. You agree. The crowd hums approval, not because threads are lovely, but because rules that change in view feel more like rules and less like tricks. You lift your ledger and set the scissors on it like a promise. The notary sketches a tiny scissor on the margin, tidy and sure. Tell me in the comments where you are watching from and which swap felt smartest here. Scarlet to canvas, picture to letters, ribbon to cord, or buns to bread. Your take teaches our next walk. Now the guard from the gate steps in with a list of loitering fines gathered in the last hour. You read them as pairs, the way the city has learned to learn. Loitering, lie. Loitering, straw. Loitering, lamp oil. He listens and straightens. He will read them this way at the gate from now on. He is not a poet, but the city's cadence finds him and holds. The baker returns with a tray of plain rounds. He asks if he may label them bread suited to watch. You nod. The lane smiles. The phrase is modest and proud at once. He sells out. The sister lifts one round and taps it with her knuckle, satisfied. A young painter, the first one's apprentice, brings a plank that reads "Water declared, honest." He signs small at the bottom. You stamp his cup, and the hiss crowns his courage. The master painter claps his shoulder as if the applause were a guild tool. The beadle spreads 3 confiscated dice boards like a fan and offers the jar to a child. She drops the boards into the glass with a judge's care and a child's grin. The jar rings. Soap walks right. The crowd repeats the math out loud. The math sounds like a song now. 2 boys argue the tune and then join hands to sing it the same way. 2 apothecary boys arrive with dull glazed jugs. You stamp each rim, permitted. The hiss knits a ribbon of sound that strokes the board. The sister names where the jugs will go: wards, wash corner, bridge hand wash, that. People here place and picture steps. A perfumer's apprentice arrives with a cone he truly loves. He asks to keep one if he posts ingredients and sells it as spice. You nod. He bows with a shy flourish, like a leaf that learned manners from water. The scribe writes cone to spice, vinegar purchased, then draws a tiny leaf next to the line. A cook from the mule yard carries a heavy pot and asks to trade a fine for a stamped ladle. You stamp the ladle. He holds it high and swears to keep grease far from gear. He points at his new sign, "No grease by bridles." The lane cheers the line because the line is both funny and useful, which is the best kind of law. A woman returns with a tray of saffron buns under cloth. She offers the whole tray to the hospital if the board will write her name on the right. The sister shakes her head. No names on the mercy side, only goods. The woman nods and slides the tray under the plank. Children watch the color cross from left to right, then vanish into the store of care. They like this trick better than applause. The notary raises his stylus and draws a clean line across both columns. He reads a deadline in a voice that carries without strain. Purge color by bells or stand barefoot at the porch. Marshal a penance route through Zocodover. He sets the slip in your palm. It feels small and heavy. The sister asks for one more set of pairs. You read them with a cadence you have learned from the crowd. False cure, vinegar. Doorway song, lamp oil. Bright runner, straw. Dice by the stall lip, soap. The words sift down like clean sand. You stamp a last quick run of cups, permitted, and the hiss lays a path that points toward the bridge stairs. 2 wardens bring their reversible runner forward, and you lay the scissors across the thread. At bells, you will cut. The crowd nods as if they all hold the thread together. A muleteer waves a bright cap, then tucks it under his band and buys a plain cord from the ribbon woman. They both count the exchange so the board can hear. The scribe writes cap to cord, then lamp oil to ward. The muleteer bows to the sister, who holds up a wick like a blessing that smells faintly of bees and work. A boy trots up with a token slate. Names in chalk, tokens beside them. You hang it near the wash basin. Tokens on slates, not sleeves, you say. 3 handlers rub their forearms as if a burden just walked off their skin. The scribe draws a small square next to the note. The square looks like a door and opens like one in the minds around you. A noble steward tries to keep a lion on a price board for pride. The painter offers a letter drawn like a lion, strong and clean. The steward thinks, then nods. Letters beat lions again. The hiss from a stamped cup closes the debate with a fact no speech can top. A water seller arrives with 3 jugs and a ledger with 2 pages tucked in his hat. He blushes, hands them over, and reads his measures aloud. Customers step forward because his voice carried the promise into air. He bows to the board because the board fed him. A cloth merchant brings 2 runners already flipped to the plain side and a pair of scissors tied with thin cord. She asks you to cut the cord at bells so the whole lane will see the turn. You nod and return the scissors with a wink. The sister lifts a lamp and checks oil bought on the right. She smiles at the column like a baker pleased by a good rise. You feel the plank under your hands and realize it has changed from furniture to instrument. Every line is a string, every stamp is a note. The lane hums the tune now. A group of travelers from far fields tilt their heads to listen. One asks why the city plays its rules in public. Because doors hoard, you answer, and bridges show. He touches his heart and says he will carry the idea to a fair you will never see. The drummer returns, chords new on his drum, and rolls a steady pattern while you read pairs once more. Numbers fall into steps. Steps turn into trust. A woman behind you whispers that fear halves when neighbors watch the swap together. You keep her line for the next board. The notary draws a closing stroke and reads the deadline again, calm and firm. Purge color by bells or stand barefoot at the porch. Marshal a penance route through Zocodover. He places the slip in your palm with 2 fingers. You lift the jar so the last coins take light and the crowd can forgive itself for needing rules. You hand the sister the bundle of right column notes and she smiles the tired smile of someone who just stocked lamps and vinegar for wards that would have gone dim. The scribe squares his quill and wipes the plank with a clean cloth. The beadle taps your sleeve with 2 fingers, a private salute that says, "Keep walking." You step away from the table and the crowd opens a path. Your lantern catches a ripple on the river and turns it to quicksilver. You point the light towards Zocodover, not to scold, to show, because the next lesson needs a street, a chorus, and a pair of scissors tied to a deadline the whole city can see. Before you move, the notary asks for a rehearsal. He unrolls a narrow strip of cloth across the plank, plain on one side, bright on the other, pinned with a red thread. You hold the scissors above the knot. The draper counts, not like a judge, more like a mason who trusts a plumb line. 1, 2, 3. You snip. The bright face folds away, and the plain face lies calm. The lane exhales. A porter in the back calls out that practice makes law feel less like thunder and more like weather you can plan for. People laugh and repeat the line. The scribe writes rehearsal beside the entry and draws a tiny knot next to it. Tiny pictures help the day remember itself. The sister uses the moment to point. Here lamp oil, here vinegar, here straw, here bread, so the eyes can file things where hands will need them. A merchant from the far edge asks why fairs wear rules so loudly when smaller streets whisper them. Because crowds are engines, you say, and engines need visible brakes. Because money brings touch, and touch brings risk. Parish fines price scandal. Guild rules price honesty. Both claim the same cure, and the cure is sight. He nods and tightens the laces hidden inside his sleeves, a quiet concession and a useful one. Two boys tug a mule by the bridle past the table. They stop to watch you stamp a cup. One asks if the hiss hurts. Only pride, you answer. Pride heals faster than skin. Their mother grins and buys 2 plain rolls from the baker's last basket. A glove maker steps up with a crate and complains that grease keeps creeping onto straps hung near the cook's. You point at the cook's board, no grease by bridles, and invite him to shift his pegs. He does, and the fix works in the time it takes to lift a crate. The scribe writes pegs moved beside the entry, because some rules live best on wood and some live in elbows. A student asks to keep a small feather if he pins a tag that reads student, not gentleman. The beadle nods. Labels move pride where fines cannot reach. The student thanks him and agrees to read measures aloud at the wine stall as payment for that mercy. The sign painter shows a trick he learned today. Letters on a board pull a line forward, he says, because people like hearing their eyes speak. He writes, "Water declared" on a cup and asks the seller to echo. The seller repeats the words, and 3 customers step up as if the syllables were a rope. An old man taps the plank and says, "Proof tastes better than rumor." The sister sets a row of stamped cups along the edge, so proof sits where thirst stands. The drummer gives 1 neat roll. The day settles into a pattern everyone can walk again. The notary points at your ledger, then towards Zocodover. The line opens like a friendly gate. You lift the jar and step forward. You lift the jar and turn from the bridge toward Zocodover. The crowd loosens like a knot. The beadle gives you 1 nod that means marshal the steps. Your horn lantern throws a square of gold on the paving where carts have polished the stone. You lift the jar and turn from the bridge toward Zocodover. The crowd loosens like a knot. The beadle gives you 1 nod that means marshal the steps. Your horn lantern throws a square of gold on the paving where carts have polished the stone. The notary rolls the order, tucks it in your palm, and points to the hospital sister waiting with undyed packets and folded cords. If walking these rules with us fits your day, subscribe and ring the bell so we keep meeting on this square, seal by seal, ledger by ledger. You carry the lantern to the front and hold it high so faces gather into a quiet. The beadle speaks. Penance and provisioning, he says, the city's 2 hands working in 1 rhythm. You repeat it, and the phrase takes. A stall holder with a bright napkin steps forward. It shames the canvas you cut earlier, and he knows it. We auction this first, you say. He nods, relieved at a clear door. The sister lifts the napkin like a banner, then turns it sideways into cloth again. Bids climb in small hops. The buyer is a cook who understands both Greece and gospel. She pays in coins and intention. You count both out loud. The crowd enjoys the math because the math is simple and just. The sister folds the napkin into 4, cuts it into service cloths, and holds the stack like bread. You write napkin to service on the left column and bread, oil, soap on the right. The scribe nods at your habit of speaking the ledger while you move. People lean closer when numbers sound like steps. A drummer taps the rim of his kettle to mark the swap. A small cheer rises, then quiet returns like a well-trained horse. A second stallholder brings a crest sewn to his apron. He scowls as if the thread bites. You hold the lantern for his hands. He unpicks the stitches, fingers rough and patient. The crest falls into your palm, heavier than cloth, because pride weighs more than wool. You set it on the plank. A boy raises a hand. May I make it into a cushion for a porter's back? The sister nods. The boy stuffs straw into a sleeve, wraps the crest around it, and stitches in quick, honest bites. He holds up the cushion, and the square approves with a hush that feels earned. Along the left edge of the square, a theologian ladles broth from a pot that smells of clove and pepper. He takes a pewter cup, slow and ceremonial, in a way that breaks tension instead of making it. He sips, smacks his lips with care, and bows toward your stamp. Modesty can taste warm, he says. People laugh without meanness. He taps the rim and asks you to stamp 2 more, 1 for a widow in the line, 1 for a porter. You press the seal. The hiss writes its small sentence. The cup feels safer in the hand, and the stew seems braver in the mouth. The beadle signals. Time for the linen. You shoulder 3 folded tunics from a cart and hand them to innkeepers and stallholders who have come in undyed cloth. They look reserved and real, like walls that keep both rain and panic out. A knot of guild officers shuffle near the trestle, muttering that fairs always take the blame while big houses shrug. Then one of them hears the thinness in his own complaint. Price is steady because people see the same board, he admits. Temper's steady because neighbors copy each other in public. The rest fall quiet and nod. You announce a small rule and let it ride the drummer's tune. 1 ribbon equals 2 ties. 1 picture equals 2 letters. 1 bun equals 2 loaves. The translations please the lane because they balance like a scale. A young mercer steps up with a bright sash, eyes flashing with the same color. He wraps the cloth into a cord for an apron and bows to the sister. You do not stamp this trade, The lane stamps it with a happy sound that is not clapping. You have learned when not to add heat. A long rope of people files past the plank in a slow turn, a river making its own banks so it does not spill. Children walk in pairs, each carrying a small sign. Linen in, linen out, vinegar bought, cups permitted. They chant plain words that make a cleaner music than any lute could reach here. To travelers who do not speak this city's accent yet, repeat the words after the children with care, then grin when they win the sounds. Language helps hands stand still and do the work. The beetle touches your sleeve. A man in a velvet hood has been stuck on the edge, unsure how to step down without a tear. You go to him and whisper, fold it to a veil. He does, quick, grateful, face saved, fee avoided. He will remember you, but more important, the crowd will remember the trick that keeps fines scarce and dignity cheap. The scribe writes, face saved, next to the left column anyway, a small joke that carries a civic lesson. A girl tugs your sleeve and points to her mother's stall, where a scarf is already turning to an apron cord. Toledo pretends virtue is beige. Some days the pretense does the work. Heads tilt as the line passes because the sentence walks on two legs, a wink and a spine. A butcher repeats it to his apprentice as if it were a cut chart. A ribbon seller repeats it as if it were a limit on dye. Both feel seen by the same line, which is what law tries to do when it is brave. The theologian clinks his spoon on the rim, one soft tap that sounds like restraint training itself. The drummer answers with a small roll that knows when to stop. You and the beetle step off to set the route. The procession takes the long edge of Zocodover, passes the blade maker's lane, rounds the almond seller's corner, and touches the bridge again so the swap table can hold the middle note. You look back and watch an exchange with no order barked. The ribbon woman gives the painter 2 narrow strips for tie strings. The painter promises letters for a wine plank that still clings to lions. He learns and teaches at once. The line hums. At the hospital gate, you pause and turn fines into alms in plain speech. Doorway song, lamp oil, dice on the lip, soap, saffron buns, bread, ribbon to cord, vinegar. The sister raises the lamp and shows how the new oil gives a steady flame. A baker holds up 2 plain rounds like a juggler who got religion. People smile and reach for coins. The scribe's quill races. The plank takes more weight and holds. The city grows heavier and steadier in the same moment. For the city. During a lull, a court clerk with neat hands tries to slip a named credit onto the alms side. The sister shakes her head. Goods only. He blushes and nods. The rule is hard and kind. You admire it because it keeps the plank from turning into a stage set for vanity. A porter under a load of skins shifts his weight and asks if the new cord will bite less than the ribbon did. The ribbon woman says yes and proves it by wrapping his shoulder and pulling with her own arm. He sighs in relief and grins at the plank. A cluster of girls bring bright napkins taken from 3 stalls and offer them to the sister. She sells one at a quick whisper auction, then sends the coins to the vinegar man with a list. The girls run and return with jugs and a neat story of measures checked in public. The notary smiles because this is the best kind of literacy, the kind that walks far enough to buy something the hand can feel. The girls hold their heads higher by a thumb. The square sees it and invests in the posture. A taverner shows you 2 signs he painted in his careful hand. One reads, "Watered, declared." The other reads, "Measure, posted." He asks which should stand at the door. The first, you say, because letters that admit a fault turn rumors into receipts. He nods and posts it where the sun strikes in midday. Customers murmur and line up as if the words were a clean bench. You stamp his dull glazed jug. The hiss writes the second signature a buyer needs. Trust loves the sound. An almond seller tries a tune too close to bells. You tilt your head and point with the lantern toward the corner where music does not crowd prayer. He bows, adjusts his feet, and carries the melody along the safer wall. He shares almonds with the beadle in a quiet peace gesture. The beadle grins crookedly and tucks 2 in your palm. Protein is a civic virtue no ordinance ever wrote down, and every square understands. The drummer eats 1 and keeps time with the other hand. Now the route turns past a shuttered stall, where a woman folds a silk scarf into a plain head wrap. She does not need a law to read the wind across a square that has learned to stand upright together. She steps into the procession without losing her balance as a person. You admire her steady eyes and tell the scribe to note that witness replaces punishment when hands remember the drill. He writes the line and underlines it once, brief and spare. At the warden's table, a steward brings a bucket of small seals and asks you to cut a length of red thread for each stall that must darken its doorway at bells. He wants the cut to be a public act. You measure, cut, and press each thread into his palm with a seal wrapped around it. The steward pockets the small orders like seeds. He says he will sprout them at the exact hour. The notary records how many will go out and how many you will cut later, so people can watch the change with smiles, not shocks. A cloth woman arrives with a reversible apron she stitched over 3 long mornings. She shows how the plain side faces the crowd while she works, Then how the bright side faces her when she ladles stew for herself. She calls it quiet joy, and the lane takes the phrase as if it were salt for stew. You approve the rim of her serving cup, then stamp it permitted. She lifts it to the theologian, who blesses the idea with a nod that looks like a bow to a sparrow. A guild warden, who has been grumbling since dawn, brings the scribe a gift. He has drawn a small grid for fines and alms that fits the narrow margin of any ledger, a pocket version of the plank. He asks if you will teach stallholders how to copy it onto their own pages. You look at the little grid and feel the future step into it. Yes, you say. He swallows and almost smiles. He did not expect praise to feel so light. You linger on it so he can carry the feeling home. The procession reaches the old olive press, now a public bench. You rest the lantern on the stone and read a fresh set of pairs in a bright voice so the circle hears. False cure, vinegar. Loud song, lamp oil. Bright runner, straw. Dice at the lip, soap. The words have become weather. People decide their day by them. A boy taps the bench 4 times for each pair. He is building a rhythm someone will steal for a street game by tomorrow. You hope they do. Games hold rules in friendly fingers. Near the grain court, a miller with flour on his sleeves says bright bags draw crowds that trample his wayboard. Find me now for a plain seal, he asks. You grin. He pays. You stamp. He keeps one soft bag and hands it for a porter's cushion. The boy beams. Seams of order move through the square like threads crossing a loom. The cloth that comes off that loom is drab in places, and you respect it because drab cloth tends to outlast songs. A woman leans from her stall and calls to you that her letters beat her picture again. She sold out early. She shrugs at the surprise and promises to teach the trick to her sister. The beadle hears and cups his ear toward the pledge with a flourish that makes children laugh. The job need not starve of joy. Another bundle of bright cloth lands on the plank. The sister auctions it fast, hands the money to a messenger, and points to the lamp the coins will feed. The messenger runs, comes back with a flask that smells of olives and care, and presents it to the board. The scribe writes the move and adds a small olive leaf to his line. He is honest in his art. He is also thorough. The leaf will help him recall this hour when the book feels like a wall instead of a door. You pause to let the square settle. You take the chance to ask the people beyond the camera of your eyes, where are you watching from, and which swap felt smartest to your city? Banner to cushion, picture to letters, bright sash to apron cord. Drop a note so we can bring your trick to our next street. A woman from farther south shouts the name of her town back at you as if comments can travel on air. They can, for the length of a smile and the length of a lane. The procession winds again past the trestles by the bridge. You rest the jar, read a final pair of lines, and pause for a beat before the last cut. The notary produces the red thread tied to a bright runner, granted a clean waiver for an hour of festival. You lift the scissors. Bells roll from the hill. You snip. The runner turns to plain. The crowd's murmured yes sounds like a held storm choosing to become rain. A porter from the skin yard bows to the board and says his shoulders will rest easier now. The theologian finishes his broth and praises the spoon for telling him when to stop. Moderation is a tool, not a halo, he says. The line chuckles like gravel under a clean wheel. The beadle claps you on the shoulder the way an older brother does when the watch went well. He opens his hand and shows the small, fresh order that has been pressing in his palm. Your name sits on the top line because you carry the lantern for the next rounds, while the square learns to carry itself for an hour at a time. The notary stamps the order. The sister nods. The scribe taps his quill on the clean part of the plank. You tuck the slip into the safe place inside your ledger. It sits there like a new hinge. Punishment behaves like a subscription. You will go on collecting the fee that buys lamp oil and vinegar that tastes like health. You accept the logic because you have seen it work, even when you doubted the plot. Sometimes policy needs theater. Sometimes theater needs a ledger. Either way, the square keeps steady. You pivot toward the grain court and the apothecary row. Flour dust lifts from the sacks like smoke that never learned to bite. Brass weights gleam on a stall that smells of rosemary and clean fat. The scribe will want to read labels. The almotassen will want to check measures. The sister will want to know if the vinegar holds through the week. The drummer will test how quiet music can feel like safety instead of scolding. You want to see if letters keep beating lions. The lantern in your hand thrums like a quiet drum. A child runs up with a scrap of canvas. She asks if she can paint letters on it for her mother's stall. She wants to write, "Bread honest." You offer your chalk. She prints the words with care. The crowd sees the promise and moves 2 steps closer to the stall. Her mother gasps and laughs at the same time. She kisses the child's hair. The chalk smears on her fingers. You stamp a cup nearby so the hiss crowns the scene with proof. The beadle points his rod toward the alley you must take next. You gather the jar, the chalk, and the little scissors. You feel the weight the city has passed into your hand. Weight does not only mean burden, it can also mean trust. You smile at that fact and catch 3 other smiles thrown back. The square still smells of garlic and brass. It smells a little less of panic. You step, and the street gives you room. The board behind you looks like a door again. The sister covers the plank with a cloth. The scribe closes his book with a sound like a firm answer. You set your course between sacks and glass, toward the lists and scales that will feed the swap tomorrow. You do not hurry. The city walks best when it can see its own feet. The lantern hangs from your fist and marks pace like a metronome that understands mercy. Ahead, the grain court's long bench gleams where hands have polished it for years. Beyond that, the apothecary row waits with vinegar, sulfur, olive oil, and the arguments that keep health honest. You bring the stamp for cups and the questions fit for the street. You reach the edge of the court and lift the order just enough to feel the dry scrape of the paper. The beadle nods at you as if the nod were a key. He will post the route while you measure the temper of the street. You point your lantern at a mark on the stone that shows where people should stand when the line forms. Someone chalked it earlier. You suspect it was the ribbon woman. She grins as if she were guilty and proud. The air smells of grain and vinegar in equal share. You steady the jar and say the lines in your head one last time. It feels exact and earned. You hold the horn lantern low, and the square breathes around its small shine. The beetle touches the jam and throws a calm shadow across the doorway, a perfect cue for the flip you have been teaching. Cloth rolls from bright to plain in one motion. Steam folds back from a stew cart, and the lane exhales as if a knot unpicked itself. If walking these rules with us fits your day, subscribe and ring the bell so we keep meeting here, stall by stall, seal by seal, ledger by ledger. Your chalk draws a neat ear on the post for inspection. People like the ear. It listens without shouting. The innkeeper shows a folded strip of parchment. Feast Eve waiver, good until the bell. You read the line aloud, simple and clear. You tie a red thread through its hole and set the knot where any hand can see it. No folding waivers into hats, no hiding permissions under lace. You press the seal and leave a crescent of wax that looks like a small moon. Rules feel kinder when they look like things you can touch. Across the courtyard, 3 servers practice their flips at your signal. The beetle shades the jam with his palm, and each runner turns from bright to undyed. One bowl rattles, then steadies. Nothing spills. A boy claps once and stops on his own. Learning beats music when neighbors want to keep eating in peace. You chalk another ear on a second post and show a young cook how to mark hers. The mark says watch me, not worship me, and the kitchen nods. A carpenter taps his chisel against a cup rim and hands you the piece to judge. Outside, the wood is plain and dull. Inside, hidden under the lip, he carved a small flower only a drinker will find. Hidden joy, he says. You weigh the rim against the rule in your head. Serviceable quality protects mouths. Ornament becomes illicit when it begs for a stare. This flower begs only the person who sips, and only after thirst. You approve the lip. He grins and sets a low bench by the pillar to carve 3 more while people watch his hands. You cross to the chalkboard hung where a painted sign once boasted lions. Today it lists watered, declared on one line, and hours kept on the next. You add a third. Waiver in sight, expires at L. A huckster with a nimble beard asks what happens if bells arrive late. Sight counts first. Time sits second until proof arrives, you answer. He laughs because the rule is soft and firm at once, then pins his permission where thumbs can count it. Steam climbs from garlic broth. You hold the lantern near the rim and ask for the parsley that stands in for saffron during a health watch. The cook shakes the green handful like confetti, and the room laughs at its own thrift. A student grabs a gourd and plucks a tune that stays inside the breath of the place. The sergeant leans in, listens, and nods. Domestic sound allowed. Strings that brag would tempt a fine. Gourds that purr keep the pace of a market that wants to stay upright. You write, "Gourd music permitted," on the slate and leave the chalk where anyone can add a mark after a pass. A commotion stirs by the counter where tokens are kept. A steward has sliced extra chits and wants to stretch hours by arithmetic. You take the tally rod and run the ledger against the pile. The numbers do not meet. Speed is a kind of lie when it hides count, you say. You cancel the excess, rewrite the list in neat columns, and set a sand timer on the plank. 1 token, 1 turn. The line accepts the new shape with relief. No late squeeze that turns care into squeezing. Down the lane, a perfume seller hovers in a doorway. You point her to the shelf inside, where guild rules meet healthcare halfway. She posts ingredients in letters big enough to read from the street. People sound out the list like a prayer. The beadle lifts his palm, and a server flips the cloth again. Everyone sees the drill and breathes. A man carrying grain tests a word with his mouth. Vinegar, he says, as if the word had a taste. In this market, a word with a taste sells calm. The archdeacon's clerk arrives with a face that looks like ink made into a person. He asks for your shard of dull glazed pottery and the recipe for clean jugs. You present both like witnesses. Dull rims protect mouths, and vinegar wants clay that does not brag. He copies the notes with his skinny quill, then writes a permission in his tight hand. Keep it posted, never folded, he says twice. You pin the slip where thumbs can point and where eyes do not need to hunt. A drummer from the procession sidles back in and taps a small roll on his rim. He likes this work. He sees how small orders teach the wrist to stay gentle. He pops a beat as a server glides a bowl to a guest, and the kitchen claps the odd rhythm without dropping a spoon. At the next table, a merchant tucks his lace and keeps his face. You pretend not to see the small victory. Everyone sees it anyway, then forgets, which is the goal. Vanity abates faster when no one pours heat on it. A woman in a plain head wrap asks about flowers. Not embroidery, she says. Real stems in a jar by the window. The beadle says flowers are fine if short and clean. You add that a jar counts as a tool when it holds water that tastes better than fear. She laughs, slides a saucer under the jar to catch drips, and nods toward your seal. You stamp 2 cups for her and 1 for the porter, who carries more jars to more windows. The hiss joins the room's music, the way a kettle note joins a song. The carpenter lines his new cups on the bench. Children gather, solemn the way they get around honest craft. He lets them stroke the lip where the hidden flowers hide. Sip slow, and you will find it, he whispers. Not everything good belongs in the middle of the street. You feel the lesson land in soft minds. You hope they keep the kindness when they are older and loud. You stamp the cups. The hiss makes a small chord that answers the gourd's purr. You turn toward the shelves where jugs and ladles wait. The innkeeper asks to hang a slate with 3 lines. Watered, declared, hours kept, waiver posted. She worries that letters will cost a fine if they sparkle too clean. Letters are not jewelry, you say. Letters are tools. Write them big and plain. People will bless the wall for teaching what a mouth cannot carry alone. She smiles and brings the slate. You hand her the chalk. The beadle provides a shadow for another practice flip. At the edge of the lane, a knot of students debate the correct beat for gourd music during inspection. One wants 3 taps, one wants 2, another wants a rub. The drummer settles it with a short class. 2 taps for checks that pass, a slow rub for the longer walk when a shelf must be cleared. Save a 3rd beat for celebration after a clean round, he says. The room keeps that rule the way a house keeps its walls. A wine cellar asks about cloth over barrels. Bright cloth draws eyes, plain cloth draws thirst, he says. Ornament belongs where hands can touch it, not where eyes can be tricked into forgetting price and measure, you answer. He groans because he loves tricks, then thanks you anyway. He covers his barrels with old sheets that look like duty and luck. The barrel tops look better, somehow cleaner. You chalk a small ear on his post, and he jokes that you have given the barrel a new organ. Halfway through the round, the beadle points toward a teller who flicks tokens into a bowl too fast. You watch, count, and tap his wrist. You spread the tokens on the plank and match them against names. He flushes and steadies himself. You hand him the brush. He writes token slate in clear strokes and posts it above the bowl. People stop to admire the visible count. The drummer clicks rim to mark the change, then lets silence do the rest. Wind lifts grain dust at the mouth of the lane. A runner flutters before the bell. You touch the red thread and look at the innkeeper. She takes the scissors and waits for the cue. The beetle lifts his palm and shades the jam. She cuts. The runner flips to its lawful face, and the lane nods as if a thought had just found its shoes. Grace costs less than fines and buys more calm than speeches. A traveler with a painted sign asks if letters always beat lions. Lions belong on shields, you say, letters on planks, ears on posts. He grins and asks to borrow the line for his village. Take it, you say. Your pay is quieter streets and jugs that taste safe. He watches the painter sand away the beasts. The new letters look shy at first, then strong. The archdeacon's clerk returns to see the permission posted where thumbs can point. He checks the wax, the knot, and the height. Say the rule, he orders. Exemptions sit in sight. He smiles like a cat that found its line in milk. He asks about music, then laughs when the gourd answers with a low, friendly sound. He hands you a card the size of a palm. Clean jugs permitted, dull rims required. You hang it where light finds it without blinding anyone. Across the way, a potter holds up a shard with a notch that pours well. May I score my jugs the same way if the rim stays dull? He asks. You run a finger along the notch and feel no scrape. Approved, you tell him, but mark the inside, not the outside. Ornament belongs where hands can praise it in private. He nods the grateful nod of a man who just found bread in a hard season. The steward tries another token trick. Each chit buys 2 sips at the turn of the sand, he says. You close the loophole with a pencil line between circles on the slate. 1 token, 1 turn. 2 tokens, 2 turns. He sees the fence and stops testing it. You praise him for trying and refuse with a smile. The lane appreciates both gestures. The drummer gives 1 quick tap of approval. The students echo it, then fall silent like trained birds. A cloth seller brings a reversible cover for his bench and asks to practice the flip. You hold the lantern and watch. At the beetle's shadow, he lifts the edge and rolls the bright face inward like a scroll, leaving the plain side to meet the world. It looks smooth and lawful. You ask him to do it slower, so neighbors can learn the wrist turn. He repeats the motion and bows to his own new skill. Sometimes the best applause is the absence of trouble. At the apothecary booth, a young clerk rewrites a label in a wider hand. Vinegar, strength 2. You stamp the rim of his wash cup. A sister from the hospital passes with a cart of bread and oil. She winks at the jar and points at your stamp as if the hiss were a small bell. The sound has become a language this market understands. You breathe at the corner where blade makers sharpen narrow work. Linseed oil and iron filings give the air a tang that cuts the garlic steam without killing it. The blade warden calls out his rule, oil and rags inside. You nod and post a small ear on his beam to bless his grammar. He wipes a blade with slow care that looks like prayer. A draper across the lane copies the pride and tucks bundles so cords run in straight lines. The beetle murmurs that a singer has dared a verse with more heat than the lane will hold. You follow the bounce of the voice. It is a good voice. You hold up the lantern and point toward the yard inside the inn. 2 steps in, you say. The singer nods and steps. The song drops 1 notch. You thank him. He thanks you. The crowd follows the sound into the lawful corner and spends more copper. Commerce loves a rule that keeps elbows from bumping pride. Wind shifts, rougher from the river. Dust skitters across the paving like quick gray fish. You count your tools: lantern, chalk, seals, ledger, scissors for the red thread. You check the slip from the clerk against the board. You tug the knot to be sure it shows. The cook stirs parsley into another pot. The gourd hums. A child chalks a fresh ear on the next post without waiting for permission. His ear is too big and sits sideways. You leave it. The city can afford 1 joke drawn in lime. A miller from the grain court asks about cords versus sashes at closing. You show him the red thread that sits on a latch until bells give the cut. It feels like a clock you can touch, he says. Can I keep it after? Stitch it to your apron so your hands remember, you tell him. He laughs and passes the story down his line with more style than any proclamation. Before the crowd fins, you ask a question we trade in every market. Which visible fix would steady your city fastest? Posted ingredients, stamped water jugs, token slates, or red threads on latches? Tell us your city in the comments and which tool your neighbors would trust first. We test ideas on these planks, then carry the good ones down the street tomorrow. The clerk from the archdeacon's bench returns to check that the permission sits where hands point. He checks twice, circles once with his pen, and leaves a dot next to the seal. The council wants a stricter reading at the bridge after a furnace coughed in a bathhouse across the quarter, he says. Messengers are already waiting near the span. You thank him, and he bows. Praise from a lane always feels heavier than praise from a hall. You pass the lantern to the boy with a giant chalk ear and ask him to hold it against the board while you stamp 2 more cups. He stands straight as a spear. You expect him to reenact the role on his stoop tomorrow. Good. Let the street make more witnesses. The carpenter brings 1 last cup with a lip so clean you want to buy it yourself. Instead, you trade the price for a lesson. He teaches the quick test for a safe rim. You teach him the ear. He draws it with such care that even the beetle smiles. The lane slides into its stronger quiet. You close your ledger and open it again to count the same numbers twice. The totals hold. That gives the crowd a kind of rest nothing else can buy. You feel it as a weight leaving your shoulders and landing in the book where it belongs. The scribe behind you says, balanced columns are the first mercy a town can give itself. You believe him and ask him to write the line on a scrap for children to copy. He writes it and tucks the slip into a boy's sleeve. You gather the waivers that will expire and stack them so red knots show like flags along the edge. The beadle lifts his palm, shades the jam, and you cut the threads one by one. The floor does not tremble. No one gasps. A good rule cuts like a clean knife that loves the table. Bright faces turn plain. Plain faces look honest. A crew of porters swings loads past the door without banging the lintel. The drummer taps twice. The gourd replies with a soft note. The scene looks complete and simple. You lift the lantern and face toward the bridge. Wind hardens in the arch that opens to the Alcantara. The river breath pushes through like a messenger with too many mouths. Beyond the stalls, a furnace coughs, one short bark that turns 10 heads. 2 councilmen in thick cloaks cross the paving with a scroll tied to a rod. Their faces carry the worry of people who fear fire more than song. They see your seal and wave you closer. Stricter reading of the health clauses, they say, and bring the final board to your hands. They ask you to deliver it at a door where jars and veils live, so the street can witness the last lines as you pin them. You gather your tools for the walk: lantern, chalk, seals, scissors, the permission card, and the shard that won dull glaze for jugs. The beadle nods to the crowd and points to the bridge. The drummer shoulders his rim, and the gourd player hums a road tune. Traders lean out from stalls to watch you pass. A child taps the big sideways ear with pride. You promise to read the board aloud at the door where cups and veils live, then stamp the first cup in view so the hiss anchors the words. The councilmen fall in behind you, rods upright. The wind sharpens and carries the smell of vinegar from the hospital cart, sharp and clean. You take the first step toward the span, and the lane follows, quiet and awake, ready to hear the last lines and to see them pinned. You carry the final board on your forearms like a tray, and the crowd parts, not with fear, with curiosity. The beadle walks at your shoulder, the guild warden a step behind, the hospital sister matching pace with the jar that clicks against her hip. You angle the horn lantern so the letters catch a clean gleam, and the wood shows its grain. If walking these streets with us feels like your kind of history, subscribe and ring the bell now so we keep meeting here, rule by rule, stone by stone. You halt in the doorway where jugs hang from pegs and a plain table waits like a witness. People lean in, not too close, enough to taste the scene with their eyes. The butcher wipes his hands, the perfumer hides a smile, the ribbon seller winds her stock in her palm. Your chalk rests on the plank like a quiet knife. You read the ruling aloud, so it lives in breath. First, Glazed ware for water and vinegar is permitted for cleanliness. Rims must be dull. Second, fabric fines are doubled during the season. Third, bright runners and festival banners are barred inside. Fourth, doorway soliciting and loitering draw a fine. You pin the board high enough to meet eyes, low enough that hands can point. The sister sets the jar on the plank. The guild warden nods to your seal. The beadle raises his palm to shade the jam, an old habit that calms a street without scaring it. The shop wind stills. You lift the first cup, feel the cool pewter, and stamp the lip. The hiss is small, sharp, convincing. The innkeeper turns the next cup, then a ladle, then a jug with a neat, dull rim. Each yes becomes a sound the lane will remember. You point to the board and speak in short lines. Letters are tools, not jewels. Watered, declared, is better than rumor. Hands matter more than colors. The innkeeper repeats the phrases like a chant she wants her shelves to sing after you leave. The guild warden smiles into his beard and rubs a splinter out of the plank with his thumb. A ribbon seller peers around the post, weighs the doubled fabric fines with a clever eye, and ties her stock with plain cord before you say a word. She keeps a single bright ribbon for legal hours with a parish bread knotted through the loop. You approve the trick because it is honest in public view. A porter lays a rolled banner on the bench, strokes it once, then looks at the jar. The sister opens the lid, you read a pair aloud, and coin steps left while lamp oil steps right. He lifts the banner again, sighs, then folds it into a cushion for his back. Law turns into comfort, and nobody misses the roar. At the door, a wine cellar waits with a signboard whose lions used to roar. They look like ghosts under the sand. He paints vino and medida across the plank. The letters feel like a bridge. People read the strokes and relax as if the road under their feet just stopped wobbling. You test his jug, taste 2 drops, and announce, watered, declared. Trade hums. Letters beat lions again, and the lane smiles at its own memory. The hospital clerk arrives with his tallies. He loves order the way bakers love heat. He asks you to read pairs while he points to the columns. Fines left, alms right. Lace to bread, runners to oil, loitering to vinegar. You stamp cups as he speaks, hiss after hiss, each one a little pledge that tools mean safety. A child counts the hisses and tries to whistle the pitch. He almost gets it. His mother laughs, then lets him hold the jar for a breath so he will learn the weight of care. You take the witness route through the fair so neighbors can see the ruling walk. The beadle shades the jam, and the reversible runner rolls to plain. A drummer at the corner gives 2 taps, the new sign for pass. You chalk small ears where posts lack them, tiny listening shapes that tell people the door does not need teeth when a symbol can remember. A muleteer stops you to show a clean bridle wiped with vinegar and left to dry. He asks if red tassels on a browband count as a runner. You tell him tassels may stay where they do not shout. He nods, relieved, and rubs the leather with a rag that smells like work. A perfumer walks with you, carrying a basket of cones. She used to keep them on the sill where eyes wander. Now she holds a small slate with her ingredients written clear. It feels like a title deed to the air. She sells 2 cones and smiles because nobody crouches in the doorway to breathe them for free. She calls it the end of leakage. You call it grammar that pays for itself. The beetle grunts in approval, a sound like a cart that just found the flat of the road. You arrive at the bridge plank where the double ledger sits. The sister has already lined jars of lamp oil and stacks of coarse bread within sight. You take the jar again, warm the wax against your palm, and stamp more cups for wash water. The hiss has turned into a call across the span. People come just to hear it. You read another pair. A bright table runner becomes straw for sickbeds. The clerk notes the swap in 2 brisk strokes. The crowd cannot agree which sound they like more, the hiss or the scratch, so they decide the pair is the point. A noble from the country edges up, lace tucked, hat low, intent on a quiet cup. You note the fee without shame, then save his face by speaking soft, and point to the board first, not the pouch. He breathes again and pays. The rule catches pride without cutting it. He watches the stamp and asks why dull rims. Dull metal leaves no whisper of cut on a lip, you say. He nods, sips, and declares the taste better without the brag. The porter behind him grins. A rule that protects a noble's mouth protects his too. You turn from the plank to the lane again. The fair keeps offering new tests. A boy flicks a token slate to show his father how public count works. A blade maker posts oil and rags inside in letters even a sheep could read. A joke he repeats for the 3rd time. People do not tire of the joke because it holds a real safety under it. A draper toys with an old sign that once shouted with beasts. He watches the water seller's letters earn trust and sets his own brush. The curve of S in Sedas looks like a river that learned to flow straight. You speak the durable logic inside the walk, not from a platform. Fairs knit classes. Here you can see a bishop's purse and a porter's knot at the same table. Stalls display objects that can be corrected in public, cups and cloth and signs that change under a hand. Stands sit on fixed addresses you can find again. Ledgers lie within reach, so a quill can tally fairness in ink that dries in the same air you share. Church and council use these lanes as moral theaters and fire control points. They enforce hierarchy and raise funds where the street can watch the swap. A singer tests your patience with a long flourish and a sly grin. You point to the yard inside the inn. The tune gets shorter. He bows and mutters that doors are like throats and should not be clogged. He calls your chalk ears the city's new funny saints. You decide to like the joke. The beetle pretends not to hear and fails at that too. Another witness route. Then another. The sound of the stamp keeps time. You hand the mallet to a child who stamps his first cup and beams like he just made a candle. The clerk pretends to faint from joy. Someone ties a red thread at a latch for you to cut at bells. You tell them the thread is a clock you can see and a promise you can prove. A woman tests the line by tugging the knot. She likes the tug. She says it feels like the city cares whether her door behaves. She is right. Retention runs deeper when hands work. You give a leather apron to a boy and teach him 2 jobs at once. Press rim, read letters. His first stamp skids, but still seals. His second lands square. You tell him the floor does not shake when we do this right. He writes declared beside watered in letters the size of confidence. Traders clap their knuckles on posts instead of clapping palms. Even applause obeys fire caution. A baker arrives with a tray of buns that glow like coins. You can feel 10 glances bounce and stick. He knows the rule, but he wants to test it in public. He sets 1 bun on the plank and asks for judgment. Saffron is luxury and spectacle during a watch, you say. Food becomes costume when it shouts. He sighs, then smiles, then drops coin into the left bowl and bread into the right basket. The crowd murmurs yes, because the move feels fair. The clerk writes, the sister thanks him, and the baker leaves with applause that sounds like rain on leather. A steward tries a small theater near the miller's stall. 2 tokens for a longer turn, whispers only. You step in, lift the slate, and draw 2 stable columns. 1 token, 1 turn, sand timer here. 2 tokens, 2 turns, sand timer twice. Whispers are for secrets, you say. This is trade. He smirks, then nods. The board makes his job easier, and he knows it. He tells his assistant to stop hiding chits in the pocket hem. The assistant surrenders 3 and blushes into a grin. He lifts the sand timer to his ear like a shell. You retrace the route back to the doorway where the ruling board hangs. You read the lines again because some truths need echo. Glazed ware for water and vinegar is permitted for cleanliness. Rims must be dull. Fabric fines are doubled during the season. Bright runners and festival banners are barred inside. Doorway soliciting and loitering draw a fine. You ask 3 people to repeat the lines. They do. 1 in a rough voice, 1 in a high one, 1 in the flat tone of someone reciting prices. You prefer the rough voice. It sounds like a stone that learned to speak. You stamp more cups, tally more pairs, and feel the square get steadier. Fines shift away from gilded letters to lace and runners. Everyone has learned the alphabet. Letters are not the issue now. Guilds copy the hygiene logic without complaint. They sharpen tools, dull rims, clean rags, and write signs in straight strokes that do not flirt. A banner becomes a cushion again under a porter who leans and breathes a thank you into cloth that once tried to sing. The scribe totals bread and oil while you press seals. One arm writes order, the other funds mercy. A small knot of skeptics forms near the alley. A man asks whether fairs will always be targets. You answer him with a walk. You point to the fixed addresses, to the ledgers on the plank, to the cups that take a stamp without hiding, to the signs that change in front of anyone with eyes. You point to the oaths the dockmen recite and the vows the bread weighs against grain price. You point to the jar and the ledger and the way money moves through both like water learning a better bed. Fairs will always be watched, you say, because they put the heart of the city on a table where it can be mended in public. You give the mallet to the skeptic and ask him to stamp a cup himself. He does, and the hiss wipes the argument from his face. He looks younger when he hands the tool back. The beadle leans in and whispers that you may have cost him a speech at the tavern. You say the tavern will forgive him when the cup feels safer on the lip. Humor lands, then fades on its own, which is the mark of a good joke. Under the arch at the bridge, the wind tastes like iron. The clerk adds one last pair, dice in doorway to soap, necklace on sill to straw for cots. A woman asks if her old sign with birds can become letters in a day. You say yes and offer to lend her the painter whose lions died under sand. She laughs and points at the ghost of a tail still curling on her plank. She says birds are a fad, letters pay the rent. She is right. She is right. You turn the walk into a final round of quick lessons, each no longer than a breath. Letters are tools. Ears on posts listen for care. Red threads are clocks you can see. Watered, declared, beats whispered perfection. Dull rims protect mouths. Flowers live inside cups if you must have them. Gourds make music that mind their feet. Token slates tame clever fingers. Banners become cushions that remember glory without picking fights. A rule that lives in objects endures. A rule that stays in a book loses the room. A trumpeter from the council strolls over with a smile and asks if you want a fanfare for the finish. You say, the scribes scratch and the stamps hiss, already wrote the tune. He shrugs, then gives a little trilled note anyway, soft and short. Children imitate him and then go back to watching cups take seals. The sister lifts the jar and raises it once like a toast to good order. The jar bumps your board gently, a kiss of tools. You set the mallet down and invite comments from anyone listening along this lane. and from anyone watching through a glass far away. Which rule would you keep or scrap? Posted ingredients, stamped jars, token slates, or red threads at latches? Tell us your city and what your neighbors would trust first, and subscribe and ring the bell so tomorrow we can walk another street where law lives in things you can touch. You say it with your normal voice, not the clerk's tone, and the invitation sits on the plank like a cup waiting to be filled. The draper returns with his finished sign. The letters shine only because the paint is wet. He asks if he can fan it with the banner cushion. You say yes, and a porter laughs so hard he almost drops his load, then recovers. The scene feels like school without a scowl. The beadle keeps his palm ready for one more flip, but the waivers have all met their bell. The red threads lie cut in a neat coil. Someone will braid them into a cord for children to jump. You finish the witness route where you began. The doorway holds the board, and the chalk ear keeps listening. You stamp a final cup for a stranger who says he crossed 2 hills to get here. He thanks you for the hiss and for the line about letters as tools. He pockets the idea as if it were a coin. The sister counts the last loaves into hands that need them. The clerk totals one more column, then caps the ink. You give the board a small knock for luck. The fare answers with the simple noises that mean ready: a ladle nudging a rim, a broom finding a pile, a page turning on the ledger. You hold the lantern close to the lettering so the strokes catch a clear gleam. The glow warms the dull rims of the water jugs. They look like honest work, not trophies. The porter leans into his cushion and grins. The singer hums from the yard. The gourd replies. The blade maker wipes a blade and hangs the rag inside. The perfumer smooths her slate with the side of her hand and nods at the neatness. One more pair, to fix the lesson in muscle and ear. Fines drift from gilded letters toward lace and runners because letters are learned. Guilds copy hygiene logic with pride that does not shine, only works. Clean tools do not brag, they protect. A banner once begged for cheers, now it eases a porter's spine, and he vows to keep it quiet. The scribe totals bread and oil while you press seals. One arm writes order, the other funds mercy. People follow motion like a dance, step to stamp, stamp to pair, pair to plank, supper. You breathe a last lesson into the space. Order that hides in objects outlives speeches. A lawful table does not perform, it serves. You lay a palm on the plank to feel its calm. The beadle taps your shoulder with 2 fingers. The guild warden nods once. The sister tilts the jar so the oil shows clear. The clerk shuts the ledger with a small thud that sounds like a promise kept. You speak one more time, not as a proclamation, as a neighbor. Behave and continue. Your last image settles itself without you forcing it. A lawful Toledo table in lantern glow, plain linen, permitted glaze, honest bread. The inspection card hangs on the jamb where any hand can point. The chalk ear on the post keeps listening. The lane feels taller, the air cleaner. People go back to buying and mending and eating without brag, which was the point from the start.